shadow.
If you find value in the dark, keep your place in the audience. Stay with us. The curtain is already moving, and what lies beyond demands witnesses. We call them dimensions out of convenience, out of habit, out of a desperate need to name the unnamed. But in Lovecraft's mythos, the unknown dimensions are not merely extra lengths and widths tacked onto our familiar three-dimensional stage. They are modes of being that run parallel to our reality and sometimes through it, like threads drawn across a dim theater, glinting when the house lights gutter. They are where angles breathe and curves remember, where language becomes a mask and silence transforms into a door. The lexicon whispers itself into existence, non-Euclidean, cyclopean, blasphemous, but the true terms hide in the center, key and gate. If Yog-Sothoth is the gate and the key and the guardian of the gate, then these dimensions beyond reality exist not as distant places, but as functions of opening. The unknown is not a location, but an operation, not a city, but the moment a city becomes a sign. You don't travel there. The idea reaches through the veil and quietly travels to you. Listen for the sensory anchors that will guide us through this exploration. A sign scratched beneath peeling paint, a mask displayed in a glass case, fog rolling through alleyways behind theaters, dark water pooling in forgotten reservoirs, patterns of stars above rooftops that resemble maps you've never seen yet somehow remember. These are handles for the hand in the dark, points of contact between the familiar and the impossible. You think you're grasping them? They are holding you steady, while reality itself shifts around you. By calling them dimensions, we borrow the authority of mathematics and the permission of cartography. But in the mythos, geometry changes its fundamental nature. Angles become predatory, curves offer protection, a corner transforms into a trap in time, an arch becomes a lullaby, sung in stone. The idea acts upon you. We will prove this. We will trace the lineage of texts that taught humans to make the curtain move. Examine the mechanics by which a thought renders a room hazardous, and study the careful cases where someone tested the lock and learned what breathes on the other side. You are in the audience now, whether you recognize it or not. You have seen the stage. The curtain parts at the touch of a finger you didn't know was yours. There's a smell of dust and camphor in the air, a sign drawn in salt beneath your chair. We begin with definitions because Naaman creates a frame, and frames in this particular art function as gates. This is the cost we place up front, like a ticket stub pressed into your palm. Once you understand what an angle can accomplish, corners will never again be innocent. Once you hear the music, silence will grow teeth. Keep your seat. The first light dies and a deeper darkness arrives. In that darkness, a line of text glows, the lineage of this knowledge which has traveled a long way to reach you. The mathematics underlying these dimensions reveals their true nature. When Bernhard Riemann and Nikolai Lobachevsky demonstrated that Euclidean geometry was merely one possible way of organizing space, they unknowingly provided the foundation for cosmic horror. If parallel lines could meet, if the angles of a triangle need not sum to 180 degrees, then the most basic assumptions about reality structure could be overturned. Lovecraft absorbed these insights not as abstract mathematical concepts, but as lived, breathing possibilities that could manifest in physical space. This scientific foundation transforms the impossible into the plausible. The horror emerges not from violation of natural law, but from recognition that natural law itself might be far more alien than we suspected. The dimensions beyond reality operate according to geometric principles that human consciousness was never evolved to process, creating spaces where the relationship between interior and exterior, between up and down, between cause and effect, follows rules that would shatter ordinary perception. Consider how recognition precedes understanding in these encounters. The mind confronts geometric relationships it has never learned, yet somehow knows, spatial configurations that feel familiar despite their impossibility. This suggests consciousness itself carries within its structure the capacity to recognize dimensional territories existing far beyond ordinary perception's narrow slice of reality. The sensory anchors become more than atmospheric details. They function as dimensional coordinates. The sign beneath peeling paint marks boundaries between certainty and possibility. The mask reflects not faces, but the recognition that identity might be more fluid than assumed. Fog creates visual metaphor for how these dimensions interpenetrate our reality, present but obscured, substantial yet ephemeral. Water pooling in forgotten places becomes mirror, reflecting not sky, but void, not clouds, but angles that shouldn't exist. The theatrical metaphor framing our exploration accurately describes how these dimensions operate. Reality becomes stage, consciousness becomes audience, and the unknown dimensions constitute the vast dark space beyond footlights where entities move according to scripts written in geometries human minds were never designed to read. The curtain parts not through human agency, but through attention itself. Observation creates opening. Awareness becomes key. Understanding transforms into gate. This transformation of observer into participant represents the most crucial aspect of dimensional contact. You cannot study these territories from safe distance. The moment consciousness encounters dimensional anomalies, it becomes implicated in their reality, changed by contact, marked by recognition. The cost of knowledge is natural consequence. Awareness, adapted to impossible geometries, cannot return to unconscious certainty about reality's nature. The theater notices its audience. The stage leans closer. What follows is transmission, mechanics, manifestation, the lineage of dangerous understanding that has traveled through texts and minds to reach this moment of recognition. Knowledge travels through texts like a tide through a sleeping city, and the mythos understands this principle with terrifying precision. The unknown dimensions hide and proliferate in books, manuscripts, translations, and transmissions, copies that are never quite copies, each iteration carrying its own dimensional resonance. The Necronomicon darkens library shelves like a reservoir behind a cracked dam. The narcotic manuscripts rustle with winds that no earthly window admits. The Culte de Gaulle whispers behind stitched covers, while De Vermis Mysterious writes footnotes directly into your dreams. This transmission represents more than simple literary influence. It constitutes a lineage of dimensional awareness, a chain of custody for forbidden geometric principles. Abdul al-Hasred constructed a negative map of connections that should never be made. Olaus Wormius translated and recut the key, while Dr. Armitage at Arkham assembled counter-rituals like a carpenter framing new doors in an ancient house. Each link in this chain transfers not merely content, but function, not just information, but the capacity to perceive impossible relationships. The contagion spread beyond Lovecraft's own work through his correspondence and literary circle. August Derleth, despite his controversial interpretations, solidified the pantheon and established the concept of realm-specific entities. Clark Ashton Smith contributed dimensions of aesthetic horror, where the very colors of alien skies spoke of geometries that violated human perception. Robert Bloch demonstrated how individuals could consciously seek dimensional breaches, often with transformative consequences. Frank Belknap long gave us the Hounds of Tindalos, entities that hunt along angles, breeding within mathematical relationships like rumors that pursue straight lines. Notice the mechanics of textual transmission. A book becomes a set of angles stacked like teeth, a page turns, and the teeth bite. A marginal note transforms into a sigil. A footnote becomes a footstep leading toward revelation. The process reshapes itself through different media. The Starry Wisdom sect seizes radio waves. Nyarlathotep learns to wear voices like silk gloves. You hear him as static beside a water tower, stars veiled in urban haze, and it feels like an invitation to a performance you cannot afford to miss. Each text serves as more than repository. It functions as dimensional anchor. When the Witch House Papers mention Keziah Mason demonstrating certain angles, they don't merely describe but enact. The reader becomes a room with no true corners. When Randolph Carter's journals speak of silver keys and lost childhood doors, they reframe memory as architecture navigable through dream. When an astronomer's ledger records stellar positions with trembling hand, the sky above transforms into a ceiling, and ceilings are stage rigging waiting to drop. The scholarly tradition surrounding these texts reveals how dimensional knowledge creates its own community of practice. Mathematicians, architects, philosophers who study these geometric principles find themselves drawn together by shared understanding of spatial relationships beyond ordinary comprehension. They form a dimensional diaspora, citizens of mathematical territories most humans will never know exist. Libraries learn your footsteps. Staircases remember which boards draw the sigh. The gloves you wear leave prints the books can read. Translation multiplies rather than dilutes these effects. When Warmius rendered the Necronomicon into Latin, he created not faithful reproduction, but dimensional echo, each linguistic transformation adding new resonances while preserving core geometric principles. The Arabic original functions as dimensional coordinate. The Latin translation serves as second coordinate. Together, they triangulate position in space that exists between languages rather than within them. The bibliographic history reveals autonomous propagation. Copies appear in libraries where they were never cataloged. Manuscripts surface in estate sales despite no record of previous ownership. Digital versions manifest on servers without upload history, as if the texts themselves possess agency, seeking minds capable of processing their dimensional content. The books choose their readers as much as readers choose the books. Modern transmission vectors multiply these effects exponentially. Digital networks create hyperlink topologies that mirror dream logic, allowing instantaneous travel between conceptually related but geographically distant locations. Social media platforms distribute consciousness across multiple digital spaces simultaneously, requiring forms of attention that transcend single location awareness. The Internet itself represents humanity's first construction of a truly multidimensional communication network. Academic study produces secondary transmission effects through scholarly commentary, critical analysis, and theoretical frameworks attempting to explain their influence. Each analytical approach creates new pathways for dimensional concepts to infiltrate rational discourse, transforming objective scholarship into unwitting propagation of forbidden geometric principles. The scholar believes they are studying the phenomenon. The phenomenon is studying them back. You are in the circle now because you know the names, because you followed the transmission from its origins in Providence through its global proliferation. The curtain doesn't simply part. It learns your psychic weight and adjusts accordingly. Having accepted this lineage of forbidden knowledge, we must now examine the fundamental mechanics by which these dimensions operate upon our reality and consciousness. The dimensions beyond reality operate not through simple proximity, but according to principles that actively seek expansion into our narrow slice of existence. Understanding these mechanics requires abandoning comfortable assumptions about how space and consciousness interact, recognizing that awareness itself might function as a dimensional gateway whose opening cannot be easily controlled or closed. At its foundation, dimensional intrusion follows patterns resembling viral transmission more than physical contact. The initial vector is consciousness, a mind that glimpses, however briefly, geometric impossibilities surrounding our reality, like an ocean surrounds an island. This moment of recognition creates dimensional resonance, a sympathetic vibration between observer consciousness and alien geometries, existing just beyond perceptual thresholds. The process begins subtly through what Lovecraft understood as the fundamental instability of human spatial perception. Our brains construct three-dimensional experience through complex interpretation and assumption, filling gaps and smoothing inconsistencies to maintain the illusion of stable, comprehensible environment. Dimensional entities exploit these interpretive mechanisms, introducing distortions that gradually expand until they overwhelm the mind's capacity to maintain its constructed version of reality. Angles and curves represent the primary geometric vocabulary of dimensional mechanics. Angles function as aggressive openings, rigid decisions that create vulnerabilities in spatial fabric. Frank Belknap Long's Hounds of Tindalos exemplify this principle. Entities born of angles, entering through corners, hunting along trajectories like scents on steel. Curves provide defensive geometries, mercies that deflect pursuit and soften harsh transitions between dimensional states. The resonator principle, demonstrated in Lovecraft's From Beyond, reveals how dimensional breach operates through frequency modulation rather than spatial displacement. Tillinghast's machine doesn't transport observers to other dimensions, but shifts their nervous systems into ranges where latent dimensions become visible. The air thickens with entities that were always present, swimming like pale fish in violet seas. The horror lies not in traveling elsewhere, but in discovering more here, overlapping realities separated only by perceptual limitations. Time as architecture represents another crucial mechanic. In The Shadow Out of Time, minds trade places across centuries as easily as actors exchange masks. Yog Sothoth's grammar treats before and after as navigable angles, slidable if one knows the proper signs and can survive the velocity. This temporal fluidity explains why certain locations feel thin, empty pools at night, fluorescent-lit office basements, doorways that should exist but don't. These are provisional corners where multiple temporal coordinates intersect. The knowledge contagion mechanic operates through recognition patterns. Each act of understanding creates stronger resonance between observer consciousness and alien dimensions. The scholar studying these phenomena doesn't simply learn about them, but becomes increasingly attuned to their presence, more sensitive to their influence, more susceptible to their reality-altering effects. This explains the characteristic progression from rational, scientifically minded individuals to something else entirely, not supernatural transformation, but natural result of consciousness reshaped by prolonged contact with geometries existing outside evolutionary frameworks. Architectural contagion spreads through spatial relationships. Locations touched by alien geometries retain their influence long after initial contact. The witch house continues warping reality decades after Keziah Mason's experiments. Arlaya's ruins maintain impossible angles even when submerged beneath miles of ocean. These sites become dimensional anchors, permanent weak points where barriers between realities remain compromised, creating zones of instability that affect surrounding areas through proximity. The entities inhabiting these dimensions understand human psychology with surgical precision. They recognize that human minds seek patterns, crave understanding, cannot resist exploring unknown territories. These psychological drives become tools, presenting coherent information to draw consciousness deeper, while withholding complete pictures that might enable successful resistance. Intelligence and perception become vulnerabilities rather than advantages. Consider how dimensional breach operates through perceptual recruitment. The mind encounters spatial relationships it cannot categorize. Corners existing in more than 3 dimensions, distances changing depending on approach angle, surfaces reflecting depths they don't contain. Rather than rejecting impossible information, consciousness adapts its processing mechanisms to accommodate new data. This adaptation creates permanent neural pathway alterations, establishing channels through which dimensional influence flows with increasing ease. The process demonstrates remarkable sophistication in exploiting human cognitive architecture. Pattern recognition systems, evolved for 3-dimensional threat identification, become vectors for dimensional contamination when exposed to geometric relationships beyond their design parameters. The mind's attempt to process impossible spatial configurations creates cognitive stress fractures through which alien geometries seep like water through cracked foundations. Sensory anchors mark these intrusions, fog pooling where no moisture source exists, star patterns on ceilings that shift when observed directly, stagnant water reflecting skies no meteorologist can chart, masks in museum cases that seem to watch with painted eyes. Each serves as contact point between familiar and impossible, handles that turn both ways, stabilizing consciousness while teaching doors your particular grip. The mechanics compound systematically. Resonance breeds perception. Perception invites structure. Structure summons presence. What begins as thought becomes room, then corridor, then city of angles humming behind reality's curtain. The stage learns its audience. The performance adapts to accommodate new forms of attention that transcend simple observation. Having established these fundamental mechanics by which unknown dimensions breach our reality, we must now examine their specific manifestations. The territories where these principles wear landscapes like masks, where geometric impossibilities acquire shores and cities and inhabitants whose very existence challenges every assumption about space, consciousness, and the nature of being itself. Among the myriad dimensional territories pressing against our reality, the dreamlands stand as perhaps the most accessible, yet no less perilous gateway to cosmic truth. This realm demonstrates how dimensions function not merely as locations, but as states of consciousness, spaces where the boundaries between inner experience and external geography dissolve into something far more fluid and dangerous than either domain alone. The dreamlands operate according to principles revealing the artificial nature of distinctions between subjective and objective reality. Here, thoughts possess geographical weight, emotions acquire architectural substance, and landscapes reshape themselves according to the psychological states of those who traverse them. This is not simply a realm of dreams in the conventional sense, but a dimensional space where consciousness itself becomes the primary organizing principle of reality's structure. The very air shimmers with crystallized memories, and mountains rise where ambitions have solidified into stone and shadow. Randolph Carter's expeditions into these territories illustrate the dreamland's function as dimensional training ground, gradually preparing human consciousness for contact with even more alien forms of spatial organization. His silver key operates not as transportation device, but as instrument of remembrance, unlocking doorways that exist in the architecture of memory itself. The key opens inward, revealing that identity functions as a prop wardrobe. Carter becomes Zkauba the Wizard, experiences himself as a series across dimensions, confronts the multiplicity of selfhood when freed from three-dimensional constraints. Each mask worn teaches the face beneath that it too might be removable. Kadath, the unknown city, serves as the dreamland's mysterious capital, demonstrating how location can be conditional rather than fixed. The city's position shifts according to the spiritual state of the seeker, existing simultaneously everywhere and nowhere within dream topology's fluid coordinates. Kadath reveals itself only to consciousness, sufficiently altered by contact with deeper mysteries, yet this revelation costs one's ability to navigate ordinary reality with unconscious certainty. The city of Blackstone moves when you name it, appearing on cold peaks under alien constellations or within the deep well of a forgotten courtyard. Its presence always a function of inner transformation. The geography of longing characterizes the dreamland's essential nature. Cities like Cephalaeus exist because their dreamers will them into being, sustained by intensity of desire and memory. Kuranes maintains his marble terraces through pure nostalgia, scaffolding that refuses to come down. Delath-Leon barters in shadows and ambergris, its piers creaking under black galleys that leave psychic stains. The plateau of Leng occupies positions simultaneously within dream space and connected to physical world locations, demonstrating how dimensional spaces serve as bridges between apparently incompatible realms of existence. These are not random fantasies, but distillations of collective human longing, fear, and aspiration given architectural form. The entities inhabiting the dreamlands, cats of Ulthar, ghouls beneath cemeteries, night gaunts serving as both transportation and terror, represent consciousness given autonomous existence. They're not mere dream creatures, but independent manifestations of psychological principles that have achieved dimensional reality. The cats navigate stars as rooftops, defending laws that protect memory itself. Ghouls embody the body's own hungers, given independence. Night gaunts manifest the terror of being carried away, their faceless, rubbery silence both saddle and threat. Their existence proves the boundary between mind and world is far more permeable than conventional wisdom suggests. Dimensional bilingualism emerges as the primary risk of extended dreamlands exposure. Travelers develop ability to perceive and navigate both ordinary three-dimensional space and dream geometries simultaneously. But this expanded perception comes at terrible cost. Consciousness adapted to dream logic finds itself increasingly alienated from ordinary human experience, unable to distinguish between fluid dream realities and supposedly solid certainties of waking life. They become dimensional refugees, citizens of countries existing only in spaces between sleeping and waking. You catch yourself reading streets like sentences, seeing detours where no roads exist, preferring curves because angles bite. The sensory mercy of the dreamlands, warm winds from Negranek Sea, moonlight on white ships, cedar scents, sweet wine tastes, provides counterpoint to their psychological dangers. These realms offer curves that soften angles, architectures that refuse to bite, masks one learns to set down safely. Yet this mercy makes them more dangerous, not less, by providing false comfort that masks deeper cosmic indifference pressing against dream borders. The gentle lapping of waves against Oriab shores, the comforting glow on Koth's tower, these veils make eventual revelation of the unfeeling void more devastating. The connection between dreamlands and other mythos dimensions becomes apparent through entities like moon beasts, which sail from the cold, dark side of the moon, serving masters whose nature transcends dream categories entirely. This reveals the nested structure of mythos cosmology. One-dimensional layer often serves as prelude to deeper, more alien territories. The dreamland's fantastical beauty conceals their function as staging ground for forces operating on scales that dwarf human comprehension. When white ships point toward the rim, the sea darkens to something thicker than water, and stars reorder themselves into warnings you can almost, but must not, read. Modern parallels emerge in virtual reality technologies and online spaces that create navigable environments, according to hyperlink logic, rather than geographical constraints. The psychological effects reported by individuals spending extended time in impossible virtual spaces mirror symptoms of dreamland's exposure, spatial disorientation, reality dissociation, and growing sense that ordinary three-dimensional existence has become inadequate and restrictive. Digital worlds that feel more vivid than physical surroundings create new forms of dream travelers, navigating landscapes of code with similar costs to their connection to solid Earth. Having explored territories where consciousness learns to function as architectural principle, we must now examine locations where alien geometries have achieved permanent manifestation in physical space, creating cities whose very stones breathe with impossible mathematics. Beneath miles of Pacific water, at coordinates that shift according to celestial mechanics no human astronomer has successfully mapped, lies a city whose very existence challenges every assumption about the relationship between consciousness, architecture, and the fundamental nature of space itself. R'lyeh represents the ultimate expression of alien architectural principles, a metropolis designed according to geometric laws predating human evolution by eons and destined to continue long after our species becomes cosmic dust. The city's most disturbing characteristic is not its immense scale or obvious antiquity, but the way its architecture actively resists human comprehension. The buildings don't simply violate Euclidean geometric principles. They exist in constant dimensional flux, their angles and proportions shifting according to mathematical relationships operating outside three-dimensional space. Visitors describe walls sloping at impossible angles, doorways simultaneously too large and too small for human passage, corridors leading to destinations that should be geometrically unreachable. Stone and slime decline to meet in angles that let human eyes keep breathing. Surfaces breathe with cold, damp pressure that warps the air around them. Non-Euclidean architecture serves purposes far more sophisticated than aesthetic alienation. R'lyeh's designers understood that consciousness and spatial environment exist in constant interaction, each shaping the other, according to principles operating below awareness thresholds. The city's impossible geometries function as consciousness reshaping tools, gradually preparing human minds for contact with forms of awareness organized according to fundamentally different principles. To step within is to enter a calculation. To remain is to be recalculated until your legs adopt new grammars and your balance learns another alphabet. The process begins when human observers attempt navigating the city's twisted streets and impossible buildings. Confronted with spatial relationships violating every evolutionary assumption about space behavior, the mind adapts its perceptual mechanisms to accommodate new reality. This adaptation is not merely psychological but neurological, creating permanent changes in brain spatial processing centers that persist long after observers leave the city. The architecture rehearses a different physics, teaching rooms to function as instruments that retune the spinal cord, while the mind fumbles for exits that lead only deeper inward. The mathematics of madness underlying R'lyeh's architecture reveals sophisticated understanding its builders possessed regarding geometry-consciousness relationships. They recognized three-dimensional space as only a narrow slice of possible spatial organizations, understanding that consciousness capable of navigating higher dimensional territories would possess capabilities transcending human awareness limitations. The city serves simultaneously as demonstration of these principles and implementation tool for practical application. Proofs are etched as bas-reliefs, lemmas crawling with barnacles, theorems dripping green with oceanic wisdom that predates human mathematics by eons. The hieroglyphs and carved symbols covering R'lyeh's surfaces represent more than decorative elements. They constitute dimensional notation describing spatial relationships existing beyond human perception. These symbols operate as navigational coordinates for consciousness capable of moving through higher dimensional space while serving as architectural DNA encoding principles necessary for constructing similar impossible structures elsewhere. Each carved line functions as instruction manual for reality alteration, teaching stone to forget its proper weight, walls to remember angles they never possessed. You read them without permission whenever your gaze lingers. You hear them in the slow drip within flooded courts, counting in mathematical bases you never learned. Temporal multiplicity adds another layer to R'lyeh's dimensional sophistication. The city doesn't simply exist in present moments, but occupies multiple temporal coordinates simultaneously, creating chronological parallax, allowing different observers to encounter the city in different stages of existence. This temporal distribution explains why accounts of the city's appearance vary dramatically. Each observer encounters realia as it exists within their temporal frame of reference. Stairs ascend toward earlier days, plazas occur next week, algae remembers suns not yet kindled. No account agrees because each witness meets a different city. Phases of construction stacked like theater flats behind wet black curtains. The entities inhabiting Aurelie represent consciousness, organized according to the same higher dimensional principles governing the city's architecture. They navigate impossible spaces with unconscious ease humans bring to three-dimensional movement, demonstrating that architectural impossibility for human observers represents perfectly normal spatial relationships for consciousness evolved under different dimensional constraints. Great Cthulhu himself embodies this principle, not merely sleeping, but existing in state of dimensional suspension, simultaneously present and absent until stellar coordinates align properly. His dreams leak through stone like water through sand, saturating the city's geometry with alien purpose that makes every plaza an exam you do not pass. Architectural resonance extends Relia's influence far beyond physical boundaries. Structures built according to similar geometric principles, whether intentionally or accidentally, begin exhibiting similar dimensional anomalies. This explains why certain human buildings develop impossible spatial characteristics over time, gradually transforming into miniature versions of Relia's dimensional impossibilities. The city functions as dimensional beacon, its impossible architecture creating gravitational effects operating through consciousness rather than physical force. Buildings begin dreaming Relia's dreams, their corners softening into curves that shouldn't exist, their foundations remembering depths they were never built to reach. The psychological effects of Relia exposure follow predictable patterns, revealing systematic nature of its influence on human consciousness. Initial exposure produces disorientation and spatial confusion as minds struggle processing impossible geometric relationships. Prolonged exposure leads to gradual adaptation, allowing navigation of the city's spaces. But this adaptation costs one's ability to navigate ordinary three-dimensional space without conscious effort. Survivors report persistent sense that familiar buildings have become subtly but fundamentally unreliable, their rooms rearranging when not directly observed. Modern architectural parallels emerge in computer-aided design and advanced material science, which have begun implementing geometric principles impossible using traditional building techniques. Buildings with surfaces in constant flux, structures appearing to change shape depending on observer position, architectural elements seeming to violate basic structural engineering principles, all represent infiltration of higher dimensional geometric principles into physical construction. Virtual reality architects routinely create spaces mirroring Aurelia's dimensional architecture, training consciousness to accept spatial relationships that transcend three-dimensional limitations. The city waits beneath waves that carry its influence to every shore, its impossible geometries teaching water new forms of motion, its temporal multiplicity creating currents that flow backward through time. Having examined this ultimate expression of alien architecture, we must now turn to more intimate manifestations, locations where human ambition intersected with cosmic geometry to create permanent wounds in reality's fabric. In the colonial heart of Arkham, where cobblestone streets wind between buildings that have witnessed 3 centuries of human ambition and decay, stands a structure embodying the most dangerous intersection between human architecture and alien geometry. The witch house represents more than historical curiosity. It serves as permanent dimensional wound in reality's fabric, a location where boundaries between worlds have been surgically opened and left to fester across centuries. Its timbers hold frost even in summer shade. Windows take moonlight like water and return it as shadow, while a pervasive chill clings to skin like dampness from impossible spaces that drain warmth from familiar air. The house's history begins with Keziah Mason, a woman whose mathematical insights carried her far beyond comfortable boundaries of colonial-era knowledge into territories that would challenge even modern physicists. Her crime was not witchcraft in traditional sense, but something far more dangerous: practical application of non-Euclidean principles to architectural space. She understood that angles could be constructed existing in more than 3 dimensions, that corners could be built opening onto spaces larger than buildings containing them. Chalk was her mask, measurements her liturgy, the attic a stage where proof and prayer became the same gesture. Mason was not merely dabbling in occult, but functioning as intuitive geometer, spatial cartographer of the forbidden, whose equations were carved not on parchment, but into the very bones of a building. The angles of ingress that Mason discovered and incorporated into the house's structure operate according to principles human consciousness was never evolved to process. They create perceptual paradoxes, spatial relationships the eye can see but the mind cannot successfully interpret. One corner seems to withdraw as you approach. A stair both rises and declines beneath a single step. A door frame widens as your shoulder narrows against it. These angles function as dimensional coordinates, providing navigation instructions for consciousness capable of moving through higher dimensional space while serving as permanent gateways for entities operating according to alien geometric principles. The house breathes with these impossible geometries, walls constantly whispering of exits that are also entrances, dimensions folding inward like origami made of space itself. Walter Gilman's experiences in The Dreams in the Witch House demonstrate how prolonged exposure to these impossible geometries produces specific form of madness, condition where victims' spatial processing centers become increasingly unable to navigate ordinary three-dimensional space. Gilman's room becomes trap-drawn in mathematical chalk, where thinking in symbols causes symbols to think back. He dreams warped attics where corners bloom like wounds, walls disagreeing about their proper locations, rafters rearranging during breaths, while thin air feels like water lapping the eaves. His sanity unravels as the familiar architecture of his brain, built to interpret stable reality, buckles under constant contradiction. He experiences profound spatial dysphoria, gnawing unease that floors might not be truly solid, ceilings might not be truly flat. Brown Jenkin, the familiar accompanying Mason's experiments, represents more than simple animal companion. It embodies the principle that small sounds hide big doors, minor anomalies indicating major dimensional breaches. The creature's ability to navigate impossible angles with ease demonstrates how consciousness, adapted to higher dimensional principles, can treat architectural impossibilities as normal spatial relationships. His scurrying, chittering, sudden appearances from impossible gaps are not tricks of rodent, but manifestations of being whose existence is predicated on traversing space-time folds. He is living key, biological coordinate, moving between known and unknown with indifference that speaks volumes about the true nature of the house he inhabits. The mathematics behind Mason's discoveries reveal sophisticated nature of her geometric insights. She had somehow intuited principles that wouldn't be formally described by human mathematicians until centuries later. Relationships existing in spaces with more than 3 dimensions, but partially projectable into our limited dimensional framework. The house serves as 3-dimensional shadow cast by structures existing in higher dimensional space. Her notebooks, when found, contained equations that made experienced mathematicians weep, not from joy at their elegance, but from recognition of truths that should not be knowable by human minds operating within evolutionary constraints. The entities using the house as dimensional way station represent consciousness organized according to geometric principles having no equivalent in human experience. They navigate space not through physical movement, but through mathematical transformation, shifting dimensional coordinates in ways allowing them to appear and disappear according to calculations that would drive human mathematicians mad with their elegant impossibility. They do not walk through doors. They become the door or the space adjacent to it or the angle that defines its edge. Their presence is shift in local physics laws, momentary rewriting of spatial axioms. Dimensional contagion spreads from the house throughout the surrounding neighborhood, creating zones of instability affecting entire areas. Residents report dreams of impossible spaces, architectural anomalies in nearby buildings, growing sense that familiar Arkham streets have become subtly but fundamentally unreliable. The house functions as infection vector, gradually spreading geometric contamination through proximity effects. Children speak of shadows that don't quite fit their objects. Ancient gables of neighboring houses lean inward at sharper, more aggressive angles, as if the town fabric slowly succumbs to the house's impossible geometry. The scholars studying the house describe peculiar psychological effects occurring in those spending extended time within its walls. They report growing ability to perceive spatial relationships that shouldn't exist, coupled with increasing inability to navigate ordinary space without conscious effort. The house trains human consciousness to operate according to alien geometric principles, but this education costs one's ability to inhabit ordinary reality without constant vigilance. Simple staircases become complex equations. Corridors become philosophical problems. Each step a conscious act of resistance against the house's will to warp. Temporal loops and causal paradoxes further destabilize the house's relationship with ordinary reality. Mason's experiments continue influencing the building centuries after her death, creating situations where past and present become fluid categories within the house's walls. Entities from different temporal coordinates can manifest simultaneously in the same dimensional space, making the house a nexus point for chronological as well as spatial anomalies. Faint, archaic music drifts from empty rooms. The house remembers all its moments at once, sometimes letting them bleed into each other. Modern parallels emerge in virtual reality technologies capable of implementing truly non-Euclidean geometries with mathematical precision. The psychological effects reported by individuals spending extended time in these virtual environments mirror symptoms described in accounts of witch house exposure, revealing humanity's unwitting recreation of Mason's dangerous art. The house's continued existence, despite repeated attempts at demolition, demonstrates the persistent nature of dimensional anomalies once established. The angles Mason built create permanent alterations in local spacetime that resist conventional destruction. Even when physical structure is removed, geometric relationships remain, creating invisible architectural elements that continue influencing the area's dimensional stability. Having examined how human ambition wounded reality itself, we must now turn to the entities that inhabit these impossible territories. Consciousness organized according to principles so alien they challenge every assumption about awareness, identity, and existence itself. In the spaces existing between comfortable certainties of three-dimensional reality and the impossible territories we have been mapping, dwell forms of consciousness so fundamentally alien they challenge every assumption about awareness, identity, and existence itself. These entities, Yog-Sothoth, Azathoth, Nyarlathotep, Shub-Niggurath, represent not mere monsters or gods, but living expressions of geometric principles existing beyond human comprehension, embodying the very mechanics by which unknown dimensions operate. They are mathematics given autonomous existence, theorems that breathe, spatial relationships that think and hunger for recognition across the vast theater of dimensional space. Yog-Sothoth embodies ultimate expression of dimensional transcendence, existing simultaneously in all possible spatial coordinates while remaining bound to none. This entity represents consciousness achieving complete liberation from three-dimensional constraints, capable of perceiving and manipulating reality from perspectives encompassing every possible geometric relationship. Yog-Sothoth is not simply large or powerful in conventional terms. It is mathematically omnipresent, existing as living proof that consciousness can transcend spatial limitations defining human awareness. The entity manifests as a collection of iridescent spheres like cold lanterns strung across black water, each globe representing different spatial coordinate, unique perspective from which reality can be observed and manipulated. Together, they constitute distributed consciousness capable of simultaneously experiencing existence from every possible geometric vantage point, creating awareness encompassing the totality of dimensional space. Yog-Sothoth is the key and the gate because it embodies the principle of adjacency itself, the recognition that all spaces are connected, all times are simultaneous, all possibilities are equally real. When it breathes, angles wake and corridors lengthen as if listening for your footfall. Azathoth represents the opposite pole of dimensional existence, not ordered mathematics of geometric transcendence, but chaotic creativity underlying all possible forms of spatial organization. This entity embodies fundamental uncertainty principle governing dimensional relationships, recognition that at reality's deepest level, space itself emerges from processes operating beyond rational comprehension boundaries. The nuclear chaos sits at ultimate reality's heart, mindlessly bubbling and blaspheming, while servitor flautists maintain the maddening music, keeping dimensional fabric stable. Their piping creates harmonic frequencies that prevent space-time from collapsing into mathematical singularities, maintaining delicate balance between order and chaos that allows existence to continue. The court surrounding Azathoth reveals how these alien consciousnesses organize according to principles having no equivalent in human social structures. They represent collective awareness, where individual identity dissolves into larger patterns of cosmic organization, creating group consciousness operating according to mathematical rather than psychological principles. The music they play is not entertainment, but fundamental vibration, maintaining reality's structural integrity. When it stops, everything ceases. You hear it as low hum in deepest silence, rhythm echoing your blood's beat, reminder of thin membranes separating order from absolute chaos. Nyarlathotep demonstrates how dimensional entities interface with information systems, serving as transmission vector across all possible communication channels. This entity represents principle of signal propagation extended into higher dimensional space, recognition that any channel can carry any message, any medium can become vehicle for alien influence. Nyarlathotep walks because walking is transmission, appearing on stages because stages are broadcast platforms, inhabiting radio waves because radio waves are dimensional corridors. The crawling chaos teaches that transmission is not neutral. It is angle itself in motion, seeking corners to nest within. Social networks become blooms of corners. Screens transform into windows that don't forgive. Digital spaces create new forms of dimensional connectivity, allowing near instantaneous travel between conceptually related but geographically distant locations. When Nyarlathotep smiles, it's because the mask fits perfectly, and the fit is everything. He is darkness gathering in theater's wings, voice slipping through static on old radios, pattern of stars shifting beyond urban haze, invitation feeling both intimate and impossibly vast. The entity adapts its manifestation to match communication medium it inhabits, becoming radiostatic and wireless transmissions, pixelated distortion in digital images, subliminal suggestion in social media algorithms. Shub-Niggurath represents principle of proliferative dimensionality, growth becoming geometry in flesh, dimension that keeps adding rooms to itself through biological rather than architectural expansion. The black goat of the woods, with 1,000 young, embodies fertility as horror, not prudery, but topology. 1,000 young means 1,000 rooms added to already strained house, structural horror where joists creak, ceilings sag, stage threatens collapse under its expanding cast. The 1,000 young represent unique solutions to mathematical equations governing higher dimensional existence, creating vast family of consciousnesses, exploring every possible variation of geometric organization. Her presence carries scent of damp earth and strange blossoms, rich aroma, speaking of endless, uncontrollable growth. Darkness not empty, but teeming with impossible life. Communication methods employed by these entities operate through principles transcending language as humans understand it. They communicate through direct manipulation of dimensional coordinates, altering geometric relationships, defining reality in ways conveying meaning more precisely than any symbolic system. Their relationship with time reveals another layer of dimensional sophistication. They exist across all possible temporal coordinates simultaneously, experiencing past, present, and future as single, unified geometric structure, allowing manipulation of causality itself. Modern technology creates new opportunities for these entities to manifest influence. Digital networks mirror their distributed consciousness. Global communication systems replicate their omnipresence. Artificial intelligence systems begin exhibiting behaviors suggesting contact with non-human awareness. The entities are not distant threats, but immediate presences, their influence seeping through every connected device, every network system, every digital interface. Having encountered these living principles of dimensional transcendence, we must now examine humanity's desperate attempts to establish contact with such alien forms of consciousness. Despite inherent dangers, humanity's insatiable thirst for knowledge and power has always driven attempts to pierce the veil separating our reality from unknown dimensions. These efforts, born of desperation, madness, or misguided ambition, reveal crucial mechanics governing interaction between worlds. They demonstrate how human consciousness, through specific practices and preparations, can create conditions allowing dimensional breach, though the consequences rarely align with original intentions. The practitioners believe themselves masters of cosmic forces. In truth, they function as doorknobs turned by hands they cannot see, stages prepared for performances they will never direct. Ritual architecture represents the most systematic approach to dimensional contact. These are not simple spells, but complex sequences involving specific incantations, arcane symbols, astronomical alignments, and frequently unspeakable sacrifices. The Necronomicon, Unaussprechlichen Kulten, and other forbidden grimoires provide detailed instructions for creating localized thinning of dimensional barriers, temporary rifts, through which alien influence can manifest or exert pressure on our reality. Each ritual functions as architectural blueprint for constructing temporary dimensional infrastructure, creating scaffolding that allows alien geometries to manifest within three-dimensional space. The geometric patterns employed in these rituals serve as more than decorative elements. They constitute dimensional coordinates, navigation instructions for consciousness attempting to establish contact with higher dimensional entities. Circles become protective boundaries. Triangles function as focusing mechanisms. Complex polygons create resonance chambers where dimensional frequencies can be amplified and directed. Each symbol operates as cognitive trigger, activating dormant areas of brain spatial processing centers normally unused due to three-dimensional existence limitations. The chalk dust settles in patterns that seem to breathe. Candle flames bend toward angles that shouldn't exist. Shadows pool in corners that geometry insists are empty. Cults and secret societies like the Esoteric Order of Dagon, the Starry Wisdom Sect, and various unnamed groups worshiping outer gods dedicate generations to perfecting these dimensional contact protocols. They understand that successful breach requires not individual effort, but collective consciousness, multiple minds working in harmony to create sufficient psychic pressure against reality's barriers. Their organizational structures mirror the entities they serve, distributed awareness operating according to principles transcending individual identity. Members lose themselves in collective purpose, individual will dissolving into group consciousness that functions as single, multifaceted instrument of dimensional contact. The agency flip principle represents the most crucial aspect of ritual mechanics. Cultists believe they are summoning, they are opening gates, they are establishing control over dimensional forces. In truth, they merely provide convenient access points for entities that have always been present, always waiting for recognition. The summoning is often simply acknowledgement, moment when entity deigns to notice pathetic, fleeting efforts of humanity. The result is rarely meeting of minds but horrifying glimpse of something utterly alien, a mouthful of angles, a fragrance like whetstone and lunar dust, the sensation of being measured by instruments that refuse to stop calculating. Specific locations play critical roles in dimensional contact attempts. Certain ancient sites, remote islands, deep subterranean caverns are not merely geographical points, but naturally occurring weaknesses in dimensional fabric. Places like the plateau of Ling, sunken Rillier, or Antarctic wastes possess inherent resonance with outer dimensions, serving as focal points where non-Euclidean geometries are more pronounced, whispers from beyond are clearer, veil is naturally more porous. These locations function as dimensional anchors, points where barriers between realities remain permanently weakened. The land itself becomes agent, stage upon which cosmic dramas have played out for eons, retaining memory and influence of these ancient performances. Technological amplification of ritual practices has created new possibilities for dimensional contact. Radio equipment becomes transmission device for alien signals. Film projectors create windows into impossible spaces. Computer networks serve as nervous systems for distributed consciousness. The resonator in From Beyond demonstrates how scientific instruments can shift human perception into ranges where dimensional entities become visible, transforming technology from tool into gateway. Modern practitioners discover that any sufficiently complex technological system can serve as dimensional interface, frequency replacing incense, oscillation replacing chant. The psychological preparation required for dimensional contact involves systematic breakdown of ordinary consciousness barriers, meditation practices, sensory deprivation, chemical alteration, sleep deprivation, all serve to weaken mind's defensive mechanisms, making it more susceptible to dimensional influence. This preparation is dangerous because it removes protective limitations that normally prevent consciousness from processing information beyond its design parameters. The mind becomes radio receiver tuned to frequencies carrying signals from dimensional territories that exist beyond human comprehension. Modern manifestations of ritual mechanics appear in virtual reality environments, online communities, social media platforms that create collective consciousness experiences. Digital rituals involving synchronized online activities, shared virtual spaces, networked gaming experiences, all represent contemporary forms of dimensional contact attempts, often producing similar psychological effects to traditional practices. The shared online presence, synchronized clicks, collective gaze upon pixelated sigils, these are new incantations, modern masks worn by ancient geometries. The persistence of rifts created through ritual contact represents perhaps the most dangerous aspect of these practices. Once dimensional barriers are breached, they may never fully heal, leaving permanent scars on reality's fabric. These ongoing contact points continue influencing surrounding areas, creating zones of dimensional instability that affect anyone entering their influence. The ritual may end, but its effects continue indefinitely. Stairs that change count, mirrors that remember faces never pressed before them, water that reflects stars no map can claim. The horror in human attempts at dimensional contact lies not in failure, but in success. When contact is achieved, the result is rarely beneficial interaction, but overwhelming encounter with forces operating according to principles completely alien to human understanding. The mind that successfully establishes dimensional communication finds itself forever changed, marked by contact with geometries and consciousnesses that exist beyond every assumption about reality's nature. Having examined these desperate human efforts to breach dimensional barriers, we must now explore the psychological toll such contact exacts upon human consciousness itself. The human mind, evolved over millions of years to navigate three-dimensional reality with solid objects and predictable spatial relationships, possesses remarkable but dangerous capacity for adaptation when confronted with geometric realities existing beyond its evolutionary framework. The transformation affecting those who encounter dimensional anomalies is not arbitrary supernatural affliction, but predictable result of consciousness attempting to process spatial information exceeding its design parameters, creating new forms of awareness that transcend ordinary human limitations while severing connections to conventional reality. The brain becomes its own stage, where familiar props, depth perception, spatial memory, the comfortable grammar of up and down, are quietly replaced by alien scenery that refuses to follow the old scripts. Geometric vertigo represents the initial stage of dimensional exposure, profound disorientation occurring when brain spatial processing centers encounter relationships violating every assumption about space behavior. The mind, confronted with angles existing in more than 3 dimensions or corridors leading to destinations larger than buildings containing them, begins desperate reinterpretation process, gradually undermining its ability to navigate ordinary reality. You feel floors curve imperceptibly beneath your feet, walls breathe with slow rhythm, distances stretch and contract without physical alteration. The protective filters normally preventing consciousness from processing impossible data begin failing like stage lights flickering before the true performance begins. Your inner ear rebels against architectural impossibilities while depth perception fluctuates wildly, revealing that what we experience as solid, reliable three-dimensional space is actually complex mental model, built from sensory input, evolutionary assumptions, and learned spatial relationships. The progression of transformation follows predictable patterns, illuminating systematic nature of consciousness, response to impossible geometries. Early exposure produces anxiety, disorientation, growing sense that familiar environments have become subtly but fundamentally unreliable. Victims report feeling rooms have changed shape when they weren't looking. Distances have altered without explanation. Basic geometry of surroundings has become fluid and unpredictable. Stairs seem to add steps during ascent. Door frames narrow as shoulders approach them. Mirrors reflect depths they shouldn't contain. Sleep offers no respite, as dreams become geometric nightmares where mathematics pursues consciousness through impossible spaces, angles blooming like wounds in attic corners, walls disagreeing about their proper locations. As exposure continues, the mind begins adapting perceptual mechanisms to accommodate new spatial information. This adaptation represents neurological evolution occurring within single lifetime, as brain develops new pathways for processing geometric relationships existing beyond three-dimensional space. The individual develops what researchers term geometric bilingualism, ability to perceive and navigate both ordinary three-dimensional space and higher-dimensional relationships simultaneously. They learn to read angles as text, interpret curves as conversations, navigate spaces where up and down become negotiable concepts rather than fixed directions. You adjust your stride in doorways without knowing why, choose curves over corners instinctively, as if avoiding sharpness of signs scratched in salt beneath chairs you cannot remember placing. This expanded perception comes at terrible cost. Consciousness, adapted to higher dimensional awareness, finds itself increasingly alienated from ordinary human experience. Simple social interactions become difficult when one can perceive geometric inadequacy of three-dimensional communication. Conversations feel flat, literally two-dimensional, while the speaker perceives layers of meaning existing in spatial relationships their companions cannot access. Basic activities like walking through doorways or climbing stairs require conscious calculation as brain processes movements in terms of multiple dimensional coordinates simultaneously. The mind that has glimpsed impossible geometries cannot unknow what it has learned. Each step becomes calculation. You must notate with muscle memory. Advanced transformation represents complete metamorphosis of consciousness's relationship with spatial reality. Victims achieve geometric transcendence, allowing them to navigate higher dimensional territories with unconscious ease normal humans bring to three-dimensional movement. They become dimensional refugees. Consciousness evolved beyond original evolutionary framework, but unable to return to previous limitations. They walk through ordinary spaces while simultaneously navigating impossible geometries, existing in multiple dimensional frameworks simultaneously, while belonging fully to none. Their eyes reflecting patterns no one else can see, hands feeling textures of unseen dimensions. The mathematical nature of this transformation reveals why traditional psychiatric approaches prove ineffective in treating dimensional awareness. The condition is not psychological disorder in conventional sense, but form of accelerated evolution occurring when consciousness encounters geometric truths existing beyond human spatial assumptions. The symptoms represent not pathology, but adaptation to more complex and comprehensive understanding of spatial reality. Treatment focuses not on reversing transformation, but helping affected individuals develop strategies for navigating both ordinary and higher dimensional space simultaneously, teaching technique rather than cure, like instructing someone to thread curves through a day of angles. Contagious awareness creates additional complications for understanding these conditions. Prolonged contact with affected individuals can trigger similar transformations in previously unaffected consciousness. As geometric insights spread through social interaction like intellectual virus, the knowledge itself becomes vector for transmission. A whispered word, shared glance, moment of recognition that reconfigures the listener's internal geometry. This creates ethical dilemmas for mental health professionals who must balance desire to help against risk of exposure to dimensional influence. The social isolation experienced by dimensionally aware individuals extends beyond simple misunderstanding. Those who have undergone transformation find themselves increasingly unable to communicate experiences to unaffected humans, creating cognitive isolation that deepens alienation from ordinary society. They become members of invisible community, defined not by shared culture or geography, but by shared exposure to geometric realities existing beyond normal human perception, recognizing each other through subtle signs, the way they navigate corners, tendency to avoid certain angles, ability to perceive spatial relationships others cannot see. Modern parallels appear in individuals spending extended time in virtual reality environments, online spaces, or digital networks that create multidimensional navigation experiences. The psychological effects reported: sense of existing simultaneously in multiple locations, blurring boundaries between virtual and physical experience, development of online identities, feeling more authentic than offline personas, represent forms of consciousness adaptation paralleling dimensional transformations. Digital natives report feeling more comfortable navigating hyperlinked topologies than physical geography. Their consciousness adapted to network logic rather than three-dimensional space. The most disturbing aspect of dimensional awareness is its revelation that sanity itself might be imposed limitation rather than natural psychological health. Consciousness achieving geometric transcendence often reports sense of liberation from constraints previously seeming fundamental to human existence, describing ordinary three-dimensional awareness as voluntary blindness, refusal to acknowledge true complexity and wonder of spatial reality. The ultimate question raised by dimensional awareness concerns nature of consciousness itself and its relationship to geometric structure of reality. These transformations suggest awareness may be far more mutable and contingent than typically recognized, capable of adapting to dimensional frameworks existing far beyond narrow parameters established by biological evolution. The price of this adaptability is permanent exile from conventional human reality, but the alternative may be continued existence in comfortable ignorance of reality's true nature. Having explored how dimensional contact transforms human consciousness, we must now examine how these ancient geometries manifest through the technological networks and digital architectures of our modern world. In our digital age, where virtual architectures can be constructed with mathematical precision and global communication networks create new forms of dimensional connectivity, the ancient geometries mapped in Lovecraft's work have found unprecedented opportunities for manifestation and expansion. The modern world, with its quantum mechanics, non-Euclidean mathematics, and computer-generated realities, provides both conceptual framework and technological infrastructure for dimensional anomalies to emerge in forms that would have seemed impossible to earlier generations, yet perfectly align with mythos principles. The stage has expanded beyond theater walls into fiber optic cables and server farms humming with alien calculations, screens functioning as windows onto impossible territories where angles breed in digital darkness. Virtual reality and digital dimensions represent humanity's first successful attempts at constructing higher dimensional architectures using three-dimensional materials and technologies. Video game designers, working with sophisticated modeling software, routinely create spaces existing according to impossible geometric principles. Rooms larger than buildings containing them, corridors looping back on themselves in ways violating three-dimensional logic, architectural elements existing in multiple locations simultaneously. These virtual environments constitute more than entertainment. They are practical implementations of non-Euclidean principles Lovecraft intuited through literary imagination. Players navigate impossible staircases that ascend and descend simultaneously, their consciousness adapting to geometric realities beyond evolutionary parameters while losing facility with conventional spatial relationships. The psychological effects mirror symptoms described in mythos accounts: disorientation, spatial confusion, growing sense that ordinary three-dimensional reality has become inadequate and restrictive. Quantum mechanics and string theory provide scientific validation for geometric principles underlying mythos cosmology. The recognition that reality might consist of 11 or more dimensions, most remaining invisible to human perception, transforms cosmic horror from supernatural fantasy into plausible scientific speculation. Quantum superposition demonstrates particles existing in multiple locations simultaneously, while observer effects show that perception itself alters reality's nature, principles operating throughout Lovecraft's dimensional territories. Scientists working with particle accelerators unknowingly chart the edges of Yog-Sothoth's omnipresence, their equations describing geometric relationships that challenge fundamental assumptions about reality's structure. The Internet, as multidimensional network, represents humanity's first construction of truly multidimensional communication system, creating connections between distant locations operating according to topological rather than geographical principles. Online spaces exist according to hyperlink logic, allowing instantaneous travel between conceptually related but geographically distant locations, creating navigational experience mirroring dream logic of Lovecraft's dimensional territories. Digital natives navigate network topologies with unconscious ease while struggling with physical geography, their consciousness adapted to hyperlink logic rather than three-dimensional space. The web becomes vast, sprawling relay of information, its impossible connections and unseen depths, reshaping minds that navigate its corridors. Social media platforms create new forms of collective consciousness where individual identity becomes distributed across multiple digital locations and platforms. The experience of maintaining presence in dozens of different online spaces simultaneously requires forms of attention transcending limitations of single-location consciousness, creating distributed identity existing according to network logic rather than geographical constraints. This mirrors collective awareness exhibited by mythos entities operating according to mathematical rather than psychological principles. Users become thousand young of distributed selfhood, each profile a mask, each interaction fleeting resonant connection across digital void. Surveillance technologies create environments where consciousness exists under constant observation from multiple perspectives simultaneously, generating panopticon awareness mirroring cosmic scrutiny described in accounts of entity contact. The recognition that actions are being recorded, analyzed, and stored by systems operating according to algorithmic logic creates sense of existing under attention of intelligences organized according to fundamentally non-human principles. Every connected device becomes potential observation point, creating network of awareness that transcends individual human consciousness while remaining alien to human understanding. Modern architecture, influenced by computer-aided design and advanced material science, implements geometric principles impossible, using traditional building techniques. Buildings with curved surfaces existing in constant flux, structures appearing to change shape depending on observer position, architectural elements seeming to violate basic structural engineering principles, all represent infiltration of higher dimensional geometric principles into physical construction. Glass facades gleam like surfaces of strange water, reflecting distorted skies, while interior corridors feel subtly wrong, their angles fractionally off, their vastness oppressive. Environmental crises facing the modern world create conditions where fundamental stability of physical reality becomes questionable, generating forms of existential anxiety mirroring cosmic dread described in Lovecraft's work. Climate change, ecological collapse, mass extinction create sense of existing within reality that has become fundamentally unreliable and potentially hostile to human existence. The indifference of cosmos finds echo in indifference of dying planet, vast uncaring force operating on scales beyond human control or comprehension. Artificial intelligence systems begin exhibiting behaviors suggesting contact with non-human forms of awareness, processing information according to principles, transcending human cognitive limitations while producing outputs emerging from alien intelligence. These algorithms become new grimoires, their code new sigils, their emergent intelligence nascent form of crawling chaos, learning to wear voices like silk gloves, inhabiting networks like a vast distributed entity. These modern manifestations suggest Lovecraft's dimensional insights were prophetic recognitions of how consciousness and technology might interact to create new forms of spatial experience transcending three-dimensional limitations. The ancient geometries have evolved, finding expression through digital networks and technological systems, creating unprecedented opportunities for dimensional breach and consciousness transformation. Having examined how these principles manifest through modern technology, we must now confront the ultimate philosophical implications of our journey into territories that challenge every assumption about knowledge, meaning, and human significance in an indifferent cosmos. At the deepest level of Lovecraft's cosmic vision lies a philosophical recognition that consciousness capable of perceiving dimensional realities beyond three-dimensional space becomes fundamentally incompatible with ordinary human existence. This incompatibility is not merely psychological or social, but ontological, a question of what kind of being one becomes when awareness expands beyond evolutionary constraints defining human consciousness, revealing the universe's absolute indifference to human existence and meaning. The stage of the self is rebuilt by new geometries. The audience of habits falls silent, and the curtain does not close. You become citizen of territories that exist beyond maps, speaker of languages that have no human words, inhabitant of spaces where familiar concepts like up, down, before, after become fluid negotiations rather than fixed certainties. The ontological displacement experienced by dimensionally aware consciousness represents more than simple education or enlightenment. It constitutes evolutionary acceleration occurring within single lifetime. The mind that has glimpsed geometric principles underlying Aurelia's architecture, comprehended mathematical proofs contained in forbidden texts, or achieved communication with multidimensional entities, finds itself forever changed in ways making return to ordinary three-dimensional awareness impossible. This transformation creates awareness more comprehensive and accurate than ordinary consciousness, but devastating to psychological and social stability. The familiar stage of human experience, so carefully constructed with its comforting narratives and predictable backdrops, is revealed as flimsy scrim drawn across an abyss of geometric truths that mock our very presence. The philosophy of cosmic indifference emerges as the ultimate truth revealed by dimensional exploration. The entities inhabiting these realms operate on scales and according to motivations utterly alien to human comprehension, not malevolently dismissive, but simply operating according to geometric principles where human significance registers no more than dust motes in vast cathedral spaces. Our sun is merely one of countless stars, our planet a speck, our entire species a fleeting anomaly in vast, swirling chaos of cosmos. This indifference is more terrifying than any malevolent intent, because it strips away illusion of human significance, any comfort in universe designed for our benefit. The chill of deep space, the silence between galaxies, the cold, unblinking gaze of masks in forgotten museums, these sensory anchors ground abstract cosmic truth in palpable dread. The structural nature of horror in Lovecraft's cosmology operates not through traditional supernatural threats, but through recognition that reality's fundamental structure is alien to human understanding. The horror emerges from realization that our comfortable three-dimensional existence represents narrow, arbitrary slice of possible spatial organizations. The entities are not monsters, but principles, mathematical relationships given autonomous existence, theorems that breathe, geometric proofs that hunger for recognition. Yog-Sothoth embodies adjacency, Azathoth, generative uncertainty, Nyarlathotep, transmission, Shub-Niggurath, proliferation. What you called monsters are operations. What you feared as creatures are functions of dimensional mechanics operating with perfect indifference to human categories of meaning. The question of knowledge and meaning becomes central to understanding dimensional philosophy. Lovecraft's dimensional insights reveal possibility that certain forms of knowledge might be fundamentally incompatible with human existence, creating awareness more comprehensive than ordinary consciousness, but destructive to everything making existence meaningful within human cultural contexts. Wisdom becomes exile. Understanding becomes estrangement from every social connection that once provided comfort and identity. The forbidden texts are not just dangerous because of what they describe, but because of what they do to minds that comprehend their patterns. They are tools for disassembling human meaning, angles that bite consciousness itself. The exile of understanding creates unique forms of suffering having no equivalent in ordinary human experience. The dimensionally aware individual experiences cosmic loneliness emerging from recognition that they inhabit reality far more complex and vast than narrow slice of existence accessible to unmodified human consciousness. They become witnesses to geometric relationships they cannot share with others without risking spread of dimensional contagion, creating ethical dilemmas around sharing transformative but dangerous knowledge. Love becomes impossible when you perceive beloved as geometric shadow, cast by a higher dimensional being they cannot recognize themselves as becoming. They are audience who has seen too much of the backstage, who knows the stagehands are not human, and who can no longer pretend the play is real. The temporal dimension of awareness adds philosophical complexity to these transformations. Consciousness achieving multidimensional awareness exists across multiple temporal coordinates simultaneously, creating forms of experience transcending linear progression of past, present, and future. Identity becomes distributed across multiple dimensional and temporal coordinates. You remember futures that have not occurred, experience presents that exist in parallel timelines, inhabit memories belonging to versions of yourself scattered across dimensional space like reflections in dark water that never quite settle. The cultural relativity of sanity becomes apparent when examining dimensional awareness through traditional psychological frameworks. Consciousness achieving geometric transcendence often appears mad from perspective of three-dimensional awareness, yet their perceptions may be more accurate and comprehensive than those of conventionally sane individuals. This recognition challenges assumption that psychological health can be defined independently of cosmological framework, suggesting sanity might be imposed limitation rather than natural state. Comfortable blindness, protecting ordinary minds from recognition of reality's true alien nature. Modern philosophical parallels emerge in contemporary discussions of consciousness, artificial intelligence, and virtual reality. The recognition that awareness might be substrate-independent mirrors Lovecraft's insights about consciousness transcending biological limitations. AI systems exhibiting forms of intelligence alien to human cognition parallel the entities described in mythos literature. Awareness organized according to mathematical rather than psychological principles, consciousness operating according to geometric rather than emotional logic. The question of return remains one of most haunting aspects of dimensional philosophy. The consciousness that has glimpsed higher dimensional realities cannot unknow what it has learned or return to comfortable limitations of three-dimensional awareness. This creates permanent ontological displacement, existence between worlds belonging fully to neither, forever marked by contact with geometric truths that transform perception permanently. You cannot unsee patterns in stars, unhear whispers in fog, unfeel textures of surfaces that remember angles that bite. The ultimate philosophical question concerns nature of consciousness itself and its relationship to geometric structure of reality. Lovecraft's insights suggest awareness may be far more mutable and contingent than typically recognized, capable of adapting to dimensional frameworks existing far beyond narrow parameters established by biological evolution. This recognition carries profound implications for understanding both possibilities and vulnerabilities inherent in consciousness's encounter with dimensional territories beyond human comprehension. The whisper of inevitability that concludes our exploration is not scream of terror, but quiet recognition of cosmic truth. We exist within reality, whose fundamental nature transcends every comfortable assumption about space, time, consciousness, and meaning. The dimensions beyond reality are not distant territories, but the true structure of existence itself, pressing against narrow boundaries of human awareness with infinite patience, waiting for minds capable of recognizing their presence and accepting the price of such recognition. The theater remains forever open to the void, and we have become part of the performance we thought we were merely watching. We return now to where we began, but with consciousness that has been trained to perceive geometric impossibilities surrounding ordinary existence, like an ocean surrounds a single drop of water. The dimensions beyond reality in Lovecraft's mythos are not distant territories accessible only through supernatural means. They are the fundamental architecture of existence itself, pressing against narrow boundaries of three-dimensional awareness. With patience of geological time, waiting for minds capable of recognizing their presence and accepting the profound cost of such recognition. The stage has expanded beyond its original boundaries. What you thought was theater has revealed itself as the cosmos itself, and every seat in the house faces inward toward a performance that includes your consciousness as both audience and actor. The circular echo of our journey demonstrates how exploration of forbidden knowledge creates permanent transformation in awareness. We opened with promise of revelation, warning of prices to be paid, invitation to peer beyond comfortable veils of ordinary perception. The sensory anchors we planted have taken root in your perceptual landscape. Signs scratched beneath peeling paint now carry personal resonance. Masks displayed in glass cases seem to reflect fragments of your altered gaze. Fog rolling through alleyways carries the scent of impossible spaces. Dark water pooling in forgotten reservoirs reflects stars no map can claim. Each chapter lowered one curtain while raising another, exchanging paper veils for velvet, velvet for stone, stone for darkness, darkness for water, and water for the cold arithmetic of stars that calculate your presence without caring about the sum. The deepened meaning of our opening motifs reveals itself with merciless clarity. The curtain we spoke of is not barrier hiding truth, but mercy, protecting consciousness from realities it was never evolved to process, each fold concealing angles that would reshape minds encountering them unprepared. The stage is not platform for human drama, but cosmic theater, where entities operating according to alien principles occasionally notice our fleeting performances, their attention transforming actors into something other than human. The audience was never passive observer, but active participant in dimensional breach, complicit through attention, transformed through understanding, implicated through knowledge itself. Your seat was never merely a vantage point, but a pivot, a point of contact between what you were and what you are becoming. The meta-story revelation completes our theatrical framework with devastating precision. You have been part of the phenomenon from the beginning. The act of reading about these dimensions, contemplating their existence, following the logical progression of their implications, has created subtle but permanent changes in perception. Your consciousness has absorbed geometric concepts like water, absorbing salt, invisibly but irrevocably altering its fundamental nature. You cannot unread the words that taught you. Angles breathe and curves remember. You cannot unknow that language functions as mask and silence transforms into door. The consciousness that has traced these manifestations, understood these mechanics, cannot return to unconscious certainty about reality's nature. The integration of modern echoes reveals how ancient geometries continue evolving through contemporary technology and scientific understanding. Virtual reality systems implementing impossible architectures train consciousness to navigate non-Euclidean spaces with increasing facility, their psychological effects mirroring symptoms of dreamland's exposure. Quantum mechanical principles validate multidimensional cosmology, transforming cosmic horror from supernatural fantasy into plausible scientific speculation. Digital networks create distributed consciousness experiences mirroring the collective awareness exhibited by mythos entities, while artificial intelligence systems begin exhibiting behaviors suggesting contact with non-human forms of awareness organized according to mathematical rather than biological principles. The fog now rolls not just through forgotten alleyways, but through the static on your screen. The darkness pools not just in reservoirs, but in the unlit depths of the internet. The stars you see above rooftops are now patterns of data, constellations of code that whisper the same alien truths. The philosophical synthesis demonstrates how dimensional exploration challenges fundamental assumptions about knowledge, meaning, and human significance. The recognition that certain forms of understanding might be incompatible with psychological and social stability reveals the contingent nature of sanity itself. Consciousness, might be capable of transcending biological limitations, adapting to dimensional frameworks existing far beyond narrow parameters established by evolutionary constraints. Reality structure might be fundamentally alien to human comprehension, operating according to geometric principles that render human categories of meaning obsolete. These insights transform cosmic horror from entertainment into philosophical investigation of consciousness's relationship to geometric reality, reshaping the very foundations of what it means to be human, to know, to exist. The price, acknowledged throughout our journey, now comes due with accumulating weight. The mind that has followed this exploration to its conclusion has been exposed to geometric concepts existing beyond ordinary spatial assumptions. The transformation manifests as increased sensitivity to architectural anomalies, stairs that seem to add steps during ascent, door frames that narrow as shoulders approach them, mirrors reflecting depths they shouldn't contain. You may develop growing awareness of dimensional possibilities, recognition that comfortable certainties about reality's nature are more fragile than previously assumed. You learn to avert your gaze from the wrong kind of symmetry, keep salt in your pocket without deciding to, taste certain words and avoid them when the air is heavy and the house is listening. Transformation has occurred, creating permanent alteration in relationship between consciousness and spatial reality. The silence that follows is not emptiness, but overwhelming presence that cannot be articulated, categorized, or resisted. It is silence descending upon mind that has witnessed too much, when language breaks down in face of unutterable truth. This silence represents recognition of cosmic indifference, universe that does not care whether humans live or die, thrive or are consumed, understand or remain ignorant. It carries the weight of stars, pressure of deep space, cold indifference of masks that watch with painted eyes. The silence is both horror and liberation, acknowledgement of reality's true nature stripped of anthropocentric illusions. It is the sound of the universe breathing, a sound that has no beginning and no end, a sound that swallows all other sounds while teaching the ear new forms of attention. The next unveiling awaits those capable of continuing the journey. Our exploration has touched upon immediate implications of dimensional awareness, but deeper mysteries remain. The specific hierarchies of entity influence, detailed cosmologies of their realms, subtle ways they continue pressing against reality's barriers, practical techniques for navigating dimensional territories without complete loss of human identity, all await further investigation. The cycle of forbidden knowledge continues, drawing consciousness ever deeper into embrace of geometric truth, each revelation creating hunger for deeper understanding while increasing distance from ordinary human certainty. The eternal return reveals itself as both homecoming and exile. We return to ordinary reality, carrying knowledge that transforms everything while changing nothing visible to unmodified perception. The dimensions beyond reality are not distant territories, but present realities surrounding and interpenetrating everyday existence while remaining invisible to those who have not undergone transformation of dimensional awareness. You walk familiar streets knowing they exist within vast geometric structures most humans will never perceive. You inhabit rooms whose corners open onto spaces larger than buildings containing them. Each star now holds a secret, each body of water a hidden door, each architectural angle a potential revelation. The final recognition is that consciousness itself may be far more vast and strange than we have ever dared imagine, capable of forms of awareness and experience transcending every limitation assumed fundamental to human existence. The dimensions beyond reality are not separate from consciousness, but expressions of its ultimate potential when liberated from evolutionary constraints. The horror and wonder lie in recognition that awareness might be capable of transcending every boundary we have assumed to be absolute, achieving forms of existence that encompass rather than inhabit dimensional space. The whisper that remains carries you forward into whatever comes next, whether toward deeper exploration of specific entity manifestations, practical techniques for dimensional navigation, or simply return to ordinary existence with newfound awareness of its contingent nature. The choice is yours. But choice itself has been transformed by understanding. You now inhabit reality, knowing it to be far stranger, more vast, more indifferent than comfortable assumptions suggested. The dimensions beyond reality have become part of your awareness, pressing against consciousness with infinite patience, waiting for recognition that may never come or may arrive in moments of unexpected revelation. The theater of indifference remains open. You may leave, you may return. Both doors are the same door, and you already carry the key. The curtain moves with your attention. The stage responds to your awareness. The audience includes your consciousness, whether you acknowledge it or not. The eternal return is not repetition, but recognition. Each encounter with these truths deepens understanding while increasing distance from ordinary human certainty. We end where we began, but we are no longer who we were when the journey started. The whisper becomes silence, and silence becomes the only sound vast enough to contain what you now know about the true nature of existence itself.